As a faith community this Lenten season here at West Valley Church, we've chosen to journey through Lent and read this little book together. It's a way for us to explore this season of Lent, to see what God's doing in our lives, to be all on the same page together. This week as I took some time and I read through these words and I listened to the words of the saints, saw some questions, even embraced the prayers, took a few minutes. I saw God and I encountered God in some new and really cool ways. I want to invite you in on that process as well. As I turned those pages and I started to encounter what our God is offering us, a big word popped out to me, to be honest, but I started to think and envision about the idea of entire sanctification. Now, that's a big one for us as Nazarenes, right? That's something that really marks who we are in our faith. It's a hallmark tenet of what we believe. Historically, that might set us apart a little bit from other denominations. There are some that approach God in a way that we come to church every Sunday and we confess that we've sinned every single week, maybe in word, thought, and deed. And the way to be holy before God is to constantly return and come back to confession, to confess our sins that we can then re-enter this right relationship with our God. Now, as Nazarenes, kind of following a bit of our Wesleyan tradition, we believe in something we call entire sanctification, something that God does in our life, something where God helps us rise above the need to sin or the necessity that we might always sin. There's a certain freedom that our God offers us. And I'll be honest, sometimes that gets a little confusing. It's something that as pastors, sometimes we wrestle with, how do you teach and how do you preach this big theological idea? And yet, as a Nazarene church, we confess the notion that all persons need to be sanctified. It's something important that we need to embody as a people. It's this theological truth on one hand, yet on the other, it needs to be something we can live out, something that's tangible, something that we can actually see happen in our lives. And over the years, I've seen times where it can become a little muddled a little bit. Sometimes the waters get a little difficult to see as we try to think through, what does that even mean for us? And maybe we think of terms of perfection, right? That as God sanctifies us, then we no longer sin, or we've been made perfect. And along the way, I get that works, but maybe there's a more helpful way to talk about it. Maybe even along the way that sinlessness isn't the best language to use when we talk about entire sanctification. In college and school, a lot of us didn't like philosophy class. I get that. But still, there's something there in philosophy that might impact what we see in this idea. On one hand, you had some of the philosophers thinking of perfection as something without flaw. I think of maybe a school test I took or an SAT score. You could get a perfect score. You could find something without any flaw at all. Then on the other hand, you see some of the philosophers wanted something of perfection that was more to do with its function. I guess the old story goes that Aristotle would put a stool out amongst his students and ask them to sit on it and ask if the stool was perfect. They might be like, well, it's rickety and it doesn't hold up well. It needs sanded down. It's not very smooth. It's rough. It doesn't feel good. And he'd say, but it holds you up. It does its job perfectly. And again, as I read these prayers this week and looked through the pages, the idea of a faith that's perfect or something that God instills in us to make us perfect seems to be our commitment to fidelity. The idea that we have a relationship with our God where we're striving to be holy in everything that we do. And as we grow, as we encounter new life things, think back as a kid, as I embraced my faith, became an adolescent, as an adult, I got married, became a dad. And these were all new things that I had to bring under the umbrella of entire sanctification. So this process, this journey where we grow with our God, where the perfect relationship is one of commitment to our God, where then God is working into us, doing something for us so that we can avoid some of those traps of sin. That really seemed to come out in this text. It was encouraging to me. It even draw me in a little bit. It made me think about ways that God's working in my life, where God has worked sanctification in my life, and He is still calling me further and further. So I'm hoping that you were able to read through. You were also able to find places in this text, in the scriptures that were provided, ways that encourage us to offer everything that we have to our God, that our God might sanctify us, that our God might turn us wholly to God's self, that there's nothing in our lives that we wouldn't offer back to God, that we wouldn't be willing to surrender to our God, that everything that we have, our desires, our will, our hopes, and our dreams, all belong to that which God is calling us to, all that God is willing and wanting to do in our lives.